Thank you guys all for coming. We really appreciate it. My name is Elizabeth Nebraska. I'm the president of the Business and Entertainment Society. We're co-sponsoring the event tonight. Really thank you guys so much for coming. We're super excited. We have some really awesome panelists here with us today that are going to share all of their fantastic knowledge with all of us. So first of all, I'm going to turn it over to Bret Myers. He's one of our esteemed professors here at BSB and also works as a consultant for Toronto FC for their analytics department. So he has a lot of good knowledge, and he's going to kick us off and moderate our first panel.
Great, thank you.
Thank you,
Liz.
Bret.
And thank you everyone for coming out tonight. This is a great panel that we have here before us. We've got a good variety of backgrounds. And so and the theme of this panel is going to be about building a team, kind of building a brand, and more focused a bit on the field or on the court with the players. I think in the second panel we're going to have a bit more emphasis on the business side, on marketing, and it's important to kind of build that team and build that brand from the standpoint of selling tickets, apparel, etc. I just know from my own personal experience in soccer is that number one, you're trying to build a successful team, so you take the talents that you have on that team, you take the personalities, you're trying to mold them together. In a way, too, you're trying to build a brand of this is how we're going to play. This is stylistically what we're going to be good at and what we're going to be known for, and it may be even what our fans want to see. So I'll be curious about how kind of that kind of theme applies, and we do have some, I know on this side, kind of some. We're going to a realm that goes beyond, the field and court a bit. But in Alvin's experience, he has got significant playing experience and also has worked in front offices in the NBA. And then with Pete, blending in some of the esports, kind of interesting, which has been a modern topic. And then we've got on this side of the room, and John with the Falcons, and Alex with the Phillies, analysts that are working, on the sports side. So. I try to do that to an extent, but why don't each of you describe your involvement within your organizations and kind of how it affects the team building process. And I'm going to try to mix up the order. We'll start kind of in work this way, and the next time we'll come back. So you want to take this?
Yeah,
out?
sure.
Yeah.
So in our R&D group at the Phillies, we try to provide our decision makers, our GM, with any information we think is relevant to player acquisition, trade, a draft pick. We try to keep it pretty objective and data oriented. We rely on Matt, our GM, to fill in any of the more subjective factors like roster fit, clubhouse fit, sort of contract, marketability. So we try to just focus on what has the player done and what do we think the player will do in the future, and try to keep it to that relatively narrow analysis. But for example, this offseason, I think our analysts wrote up something like 100 or 200 players across baseball that were a page or two reports, sent those on to Matt. And then for the most part, we were done unless he had a follow-up on a certain player or something to dig in a little more. If a certain player became available, we would do some follow-up. But for the most part, this offseason, a lot of our stuff was done sort of in the October, November timeframe, getting ready for everything that happened in the offseason.
In Atlanta, I would say the main difference between R2 is that it's much more team-oriented because there are 11 players on the field for you at all times, and it's not necessarily about quantifying how this player is in a vacuum. We have to figure out how does the team-building process look as a whole. So the main areas we're focused on are in the season, we help with game planning stuff and try and identify if we're trying to beat an opponent, is there certain team-level things that we could be paying attention to, certain players to pick on, things like that, but it definitely does come back to the game plan is at the team level, and there's 53 people that could be involved in it on our side of things, and then kind of considering there's more layers to that. So it's not like if we identify a corner who's terrible that we want Julio to violate every single play, that we can make sure that that's a one-on-one matchup every single play. We have to figure out how that fits into the team, and then same thing with player evaluation. we have our own methods of trying to help with contract negotiations or identifying undervalued players from a scouting perspective in the draft, but quantifying what is success in football is so much harder than it is in basketball or baseball, where baseball it's a one-on-one game, basketball there's only 5 players, and if you have LeBron James you're pretty good, whereas in football we have Matt Ryan and Julio Jones, but if we don't have 5 offensive linemen to block for Matt Ryan, those things don't necessarily matter. So trying to figure out what is the sum of the parts going to be that's greater than each of their individual values, and just make that work and build a team truly. So.
So my past experiences of, as Bret.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, that's it.
I'm all over the place.
Yeah. That's
Being a former athlete and playing and being in front office for the Toronto Raptors as the director of player development, but more so that would relate to analytics would be being a scout. So trying to formulate our thoughts and things like that from a talent perspective, how we see it through one lens, and then being a partner and partnering with the analytics side, it was always for us kind of like a battle. So like the analytics side and the influence that analytics has over sports and many other things, it was always like something for me and people like myself, former players that are part of organizations now, to adjust to and really receive and embrace it. So I'm still learning a lot about the analytics side. I'm still embracing it. But right now I'm not doing anything with the team. Right now I'm part of a group, starting a group called Pro Capita, which is a wealth management side. But it's interesting because our projective is trying to get and understand why athletes and why entertainers that come across a lot of money, a lot of opportunities, sometimes they don't take full advantage of it. And a lot of times you got to do a deeper dive than just people make bad investments or they do stupid things with their money. A lot of times it's from circumstances. And I think you got to do a lot of research. I think there's a lot of numbers out there. I think there's a lot of opportunity to take a deeper dive to find out why people are making decisions that they're making and certain outcomes. So that's going to be kind of the direction with our group, our financial group is going to go in one aspect of it. But I'm interested to find out a lot from the analytics side also.
Yep. Pete?
Hey everybody. So for those of you that were here last year, I am working for a new company now. I worked for Comcast Spectacor, which was pretty well-known sports and entertainment company in the Philly area. And now I've moved to probably one of the least known entertainment organizations in the area called Nerd Street Gamers. Nerd Street Gamers is basically an esports infrastructure company. And you talk about a different world than the world I was at in Comcast. It couldn't really be much more different. Right now, I would say that the most exciting thing about esports is really that it's in its infancy as an industry, but there are so many things that we still don't know about our customer demographics yet. We don't know about the areas of this country where esports is really kind of taken hold. A lot of you that have probably seen esports videos and these sold out arenas and everything else, people going crazy over watching video games, they've taken place in Japan and different parts of Asia and even in Europe. But here in the States, we haven't had that kind of real test yet. But one of the great things about Nerd Street is that we're trying to develop the next generation of pro gamers, right? Because right now we're looking at all the data in terms of what are the video games that the average 14-year-old is playing every day, Fortnite, 10, 12 hours, whatever it is a day. Well, games are going to come and go, right? They could, here today, gone tomorrow. Fortnite's had some staying power, but there's lots of research being done to say, hey, there could be a new game that takes everybody by storm 2-3 years from now. Well, our company isn't investing in just one game. or one methodology behind attracting players for that game. We're trying to invest in the infrastructure to allow mostly kids to potentially become professional gamers in the future, so that any kid anywhere can show up to one of our arenas, get a sense for what it's like to play competitively, see if they can kind of hack it, you know, much in the same way the NCAA provides a pipeline for professional sports. We want to do the same thing for professional gaming. Does that make sense?
Okay, so I've got this next question that has to do with the role of data analytics in the team building process. Now we have something kind of different, distinctive than what we're dealing with kind of on this side of the table, and I know you've had various experiences. So I'm going to try to personalize these questions, or this question a bit. So, Pete, in your case, and we know in football, and baseball, and basketball, soccer, there's going to be this performance data that's out there that can be used to evaluate teams and evaluate players. What kind of data is being generated from these esports players that you guys could use to evaluate the current set of players and then potential talent in the
Sure.
pipeline? Yep.
Sure. Well, Bret, I think the main part of the answer to your question is we don't know yet.
Yep.
Because the industry is in its infant stages. I will say that I've been able to look at a lot of the data surrounding when we think about tournaments. I've been able to look at a lot of the data surrounding, okay, well, what tournaments around the country or around the world are attracting the most attendees? What games are obviously attracting the most viewership? When you have a situation where gamers are going into tournaments, maybe even at a very small local level, and then winning that tournament and kind of moving up through a regional ranking and national ranking, that's a good way to obviously track the player's performance. But what we're seeing more and more already is with the advent of how many people know what Twitch is. Anybody heard of Twitch? Okay, most of them. So Twitch is basically like the YouTube of gaming, right? It's where you could go online and watch somebody stream who's really, really good at the same game that you play. And you can hopefully not feel really bad about how badly you play. But Twitch and the amount of followers that some folks have that go on Twitch every day is really become a determining factor as to, okay, hey, maybe we should focus on these 2, 3, 4, what they're calling now celebrity gamers who have an unbelievable amount of followers on Twitch that have an audience built in that wants to watch them stream every single day. Maybe that's an area that we tackle. Maybe we obviously we invite one of those gamers to come play at one of our arenas or one of our tournaments. So those are kind of the two between the tournaments and I'd say the Twitch streams and followers are two of the major base analytics we're using right now.
Okay. Interesting. Alvin, in your case, why don't you first just speak about that experience with the Raptors? You mentioned kind of this with the scouting, kind of the pure traditional scouting, and then maybe the role of data analytics, which is kind of this issue that's been commonly portrayed, especially as analytics have started to work its way in the organization. I've actually seen in the case of the Raptors firsthand some of the work that their analysts have done. So I guess then when it comes to scouting, kind of maybe you could describe how you evaluate players versus kind of what analysts are trying to do, and it's okay. I mean, we certainly can hear both sides of the argument in terms of analytics, but even if you sort of have a skeptic's view a bit, what are some of the concerns you have of where the data falls short or sometimes misrepresents what a player has to offer?
Yeah. Well, with my experiences as a scout, as a scout, sometimes you got to realize you don't know everything, and you have to know what you're looking for. You have to know what the direction your team is going and where your team is at their current state. So a lot of times the team will give you some type of information, what to look for, or as a whole, you want to rank players or whatever it is, from position to whatever. And from my experiences, I remember, I think it was like 2009, right before analytics really took off in the NBA. Houston Rockets were, I want to say, the first team that really, laid their hat on analytics. And we had a group come in, a two-man group come in and talk to us about the importance of analytics and the direction the NBA and professional sports was going. Baseball, I think, was the first sport, and I remember the scouts, myself, and the general manager at that time, I won't say his name, but he nodded off and fell asleep. It was like no interest at all, because you're telling people who think they're experts of identifying players and building a team that there's so much more information that they need to know in order to be ultimately successful. And that was always the battleground. That was the battleground with me being a player for my whole life and, play in the NBA for as many years as I played and whatever successes, and you coming in and telling me something about basketball, and you don't look like a basketball player, you don't look anything. So I'm like, what does he know? But the problem was with us and myself, we were afraid to gather or learn new information that could, put us, give us less value. So I think, just when you have those two entities, you have those two sides, and they can work, the better they can work together, and the more they can collaborate and learn what the other person, objective is. A lot of people, especially in professional sports, they have their own agendas. So I think from a scouting perspective, as long as we know that the information that we gather is going to help us and help our decision, then the scouts will be good. The scouts will be more, they'll be more, secure with their decision making. They'll be more secure with their jobs. But it's such an awesome tool to have, as long as I think the overall picture isn't missed, because some things you can miss through analytics. Like, you can miss how a person prepared for the game. You can miss a person makeup. You can miss a person work ethic. You can miss a lot of things just from looking at the numbers or just whatever aspect that is. But you also can see, because those numbers a lot of times will not lie to you. They won't lie. They may give you a little skewed picture, but they really, overall, they won't lie. So, I mean, that was pretty much it from my experiences as a scout. As a scout, just overcoming mentally what these new people were doing, and then collaborating with them. And then ultimately, if you're going to be successful in anything, any team building, anything, everyone has to be on the same page, right? And everyone has to be able to disagree with one another and agree to disagree, and then move on.
Yeah, very, very good points. And this is good, because sort of the segue here is to have the other people,
Keep them over there.
In both your cases, and I don't know. So, was there a football background before? Did you play? Yeah.
I did not play growing
Right.
up. I was just a fan growing up.
Right.
Obviously, followed the game, and I will say, it's important that in an analyst role, you understand the game. I would say, obviously, it doesn't matter if you played necessarily or not, but having a fundamental understanding of how the game works and what's important it's paramount. I would say anyone can learn a sport, but you do have to have some bare level, like, what you're going to learn. Even if I started out with fundamental knowledge of football, but I've worked with our scouts and our coaches to learn what's the language you speak, what does this mean, and kind of bridge the gap there, where if we can get on the same page, to Alvin's point, learning what the game planning process is from a coach's perspective and from a player's perspective, and knowing how that already exists without analytics, and learning the scouting process and what they're already evaluating and things that they're trying to subjectively quantify that maybe we have other ways to objectively quantify, and learning that whole process, whether you played or not, and just what that looks like, and then work backwards of, that's the picture that you guys have without analytics. What can we do to supplement that picture with analytics, or just enhance it in a different way? And that's kind of what I would say is the most important thing in sports analytics, is to Alvin's point, you can't just come in and say this number means that this guy's better than this guy, and believe me. You have to learn how does that number factor into the rest of what you're looking at about a player, and pitch it as just here's another piece of information. This isn't the be-all end-all. As many times as we would say that a scout got it wrong, the analytics get it wrong too. So I mean, neither's a perfect avenue, and so we found that if you can learn the process of a scouting process or a game planning process that a coach would go through, and get to that same page analytically, that's kind of where the most value is had.
Yeah, and I think, and so it's kind of interesting to think about these two cases here. From what I understand, it is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but sort of the analytics initiative in the Falcons was probably driven by GM, and then to the point where I don't know if necessarily your head coach was hired under the premise that he would embrace it, but that you guys kind of worked it in so that where he could gain trust. And then I was going to contrast maybe in your situation, Alex, where you have a manager in Gabe Kapler. I know with Clintac, he very much was big to bring it in, but I feel like Kapler, he speaks it, he fully embraces it. So it's maybe some different obstacles that what John's dealing with the Falcons. Maybe just talk about then what that's like to have this harmony. Sure.
I think it's extremely noticeable, and it's been really different for us as a department to have Gabe here. One of the ways I like to describe it is that if you read in the media, there's a lot of coaches, managers who say, oh, I'm definitely open to the analytics, I'm willing to learn, I'm willing to do all this or that. Gabe is the only person who's actually been sort of proactive about it and come and ask questions and had his own ideas. And I think that's the big difference, is waiting to be told what the idea is, and probably like being friendly and nice about it, but not fully bought in. And Gabe is fully invested, and I think he's portrayed as going overboard a lot in the media. It's not really the case from my experience. I think it's easy to portray him as that because he's just different from what's come before. But it's not just analytics. He's sort of insanely curious about anything that can help the baseball team get better, whether it's analytics, whether it's some advance in sports science or conditioning or medical or mental skills. He's just really curious about everything that could help performance get better, and it's not just the numbers, it's all these other things. Whether the clubhouse atmosphere, I know last year he sort of came in and said there's going to be no rules, and this year he's sort of toned that back a little bit. He's always testing things and learning things, and as an analytics group, that's really awesome because it makes us better to be questioned a lot. We don't really want to just give you a report and say, this is the report, you should do this. We love it when the coaches push back and say, well, yeah, but usually when I see this situation, this player is probably thinking this, and this is why he's doing that. And we can be like, oh, well, we didn't realize that. We didn't play the game at a high level. We aren't out in the field. But now that we know that, that makes sense. We should go adjust our model because it's not capturing reality well enough. So having a coaching staff that's built in, having more and more players who have grown up in an age of analytics and knowing how to use the technology or knowing what's available is really helpful, because at the end of the day, especially in baseball, if you want to tell a batter what a pitcher's tendencies are, if you want to tell a defender where to stand, if they don't do it, your work is sort of useless. And so the coaches need to be bought in, the players need to be bought in, and sort of the whole organization does.
Good. Now, with this next question, so I want to kind of think about this relationship between sort of team and brand, and actually will use Coach Wright as an example, where the Villanova brand of basketball is very much embodied in attitude. We hear about that. I'm sure many of you in the room read his book. I know from reading that book and also actually having some former players, staff members in my classes, they talk about how they could actually measure the attitude. And these are things that don't show up in box scores. They're not really part of the traditional analytics set. It's maybe charting when a player takes a charge, or he goes and dives for a ball going out of bounds, and they would have kind of a meritocracy around the attitude, and sort of have this even like this VIP club if you scored enough attitude points within the team. and then even to the point where they're almost recruiting based off of attitude. And I think I remember reading the book. I don't want to spoil the whole book for the room, but with Archidakino, when he was being scouted, he had a game where he had like a bad shooting performance, but it was sort of the way he responded to that adversity in that game and continuing to encourage his teammates. And Coach Wright could kind of see that that's kind of the type of player I want, someone who's going to keep taking those shots and keep doing the things that they do to help their team win. And so I wanted you guys to think about brand and in your personal experiences and the teams you've been involved in. How what was sort of the brand of that team? How in the team building process were you able to identify talent and kind of emphasize the brand of that sport? I'll actually start with you, Alvin. And I know you've been a part of numerous teams. You're very familiar with the program here, and maybe there's a good case there, whether it's from a front office standpoint or as a player, that you had its distinct brand in that team.
Yeah, well, college is a lot different than NBA as far as brand developing, because you take someone like Coach Wright, who has a big influence on the kids that he wants to come here and how you want his program to look. So you're going to recruit the type of kid that's going to help your program go forward and get to echo your message once they leave school. So you take someone like Ryan Arch. If we're looking at him coming into the NBA, we know what organization, what coach he's been coached under, and he has a great attitude. He's going to play hard. He's a winner. So we know those things. When you're looking for a brand from an NBA perspective or professional team perspective, a lot of times, especially in NBA, it comes through the brand of the NBA. The NBA gives so many regulations and so many rules and things like that. Those teams have to go along with that, right? So from an individual team, if it was Toronto Raptors, you have 15 guys that they're their own brand. And nowadays, they're creating their own brand. So players now are individualized, and they're trying to push their own agendas forward. And so it's harder for an NBA team, a professional team, to create a brand. Now, you want to have tradition, and some of your best teams like the Los Angeles Lakers and the Boston Celtics and the Sixers and the Knicks, they have that long-standing tradition. And when you come to those teams, you have to fall in line. Usually management, if that's the same, or the ownership is the same. But it's very hard to identify an NBA team or a pro team that has a brand. You may look at the New England Patriots, right, and you understand what they have. They have players that take sacrifice, they take less money, and they win, right? And you have a great coach. But it's very hard to identify a team. But as far as the NBA, their brand is like togetherness, the team camaraderie, the fan interaction. So it's always like, if you look at the NBA, they're always talking about the latest thing, right? They're talking about what's going on. It could be gender equality. It could be, right now, it's like fan appreciation through an incident with Russell Westbrook and a fan in Utah Jazz. They're already running a commercial with Grant Hill talking about how much the fans, we appreciate the game, and we appreciate fans, and fans should appreciate us, and let's work together. So it's putting that narrative out there already. So the NBA as a whole, they do a great job of branding, not just individuals, but the sport as a whole. And those 30 teams, they fall under that umbrella.
Okay, interesting. I'm going to actually go to you next, John, because I feel like in the Super Bowl run that you had, I remember coming across I forget, you might know the phrase, I think there was something that sort of represented Falcons football. If you want to elaborate on that.
Yeah, so it's actually interesting. In a lot of football organizations, there's the vision that the coach has for what his team looks like. Then the scouting staff has their own traditional, this is what makes a good offensive guard, this is what makes a good corner. And sometimes those aren't necessarily aligned, where we're trying to build a certain system as a coaching staff, but our scouts are just looking through an objective window. And so one of the interesting things that when we hired Coach Quinn, he kind of came in with his own brand and got everyone on the same page that this is what we want from Atlanta Falcons football. So it's that we want a fast and physical football team that competes at the highest level every day and exudes toughness in every aspect of preparation. And so those four pillars right there, fast and physical, competitiveness, and toughness, are our brand. That's the team that he wants to build. When we're building a defense, we don't necessarily need people that are not of that variety, even if they're great athletes. But if you're not a guy who competes on every single down and is tough through injury and all those types of things, that doesn't necessarily fit with the brand of the team that we're trying to build, where if everyone can focus on that's what makes Atlanta Falcons football and not Cleveland Browns or Philadelphia Eagles or New England Patriots, that's what identifies us, that it's a more clear picture on, as I mentioned, it's hard to build a team with a bunch of individual parts, but if we know that's the model that we want for the entire team, and then we can start to identify at this position, competes in toughness is more important than being fast and physical. Like for offensive linemen necessarily, they're not going to be super fast, but if they're physical and they compete on every play, that's something that we like. And so one of the things from an analytics perspective is we have them grade those things so that we know, like we can quantify those things and say, you've looked at 16 games and this player was highly competitive in 10 of them and was not competitive at all in the others. We can start to see over the long haul, objectively quantifying those subjective factors that you care about in building a brand as the Atlanta Falcons, and stick to that, keep us honest in building the most unique, fast, physical, compete and toughness brand that we could build. And that's, I mean, when we're hitting on all cylinders, that's what our defense looks like. We're flying around the field and hitting people and making us known that Keanu Neal's going to make you pay for catching that ball over the middle. But those are things that are branded with our defense more than our offense, I would say, because Coach Quinn comes from the defensive side of the ball. But it definitely translates that if that's your overall team mindset, that we can build a better brand if we're focused on a unique set of attributes.
Good. It's interesting to hear about that, because it's, you know, it was evident from the public, but just kind of hearing some from behind the scenes. And Alex, with baseball, you know, I think a lot of times we think of it very individualistic because of these isolated moments. You know, pitcher, batter, base runners, but maybe talk about sort of the team dynamics that do exist in baseball, and what, as the Phillies come together, what do sort of they try to stress internally that may be distinctive?
Yeah, I mean,
Yep.
I would say that, like in the grand scheme of things, baseball is probably more individualistic than any of the other sports, just because we don't have to concern ourselves as much with interactions between players, and so it's more a little nebulous on sort of how does the team gel together. Do we have enough veterans? Do we have enough young guys? Do we have a good mix? I think a lot of times sort of the culture kind of arises out of the players you get. So like whether it's the great pitching staffs we had earlier in the decade with Halladay and Lee and Oswalt, or in the World Series run, our offense powered by Howard and Rollins and Utley. I think the brand sort of develops a little more organically maybe than in other sports. On the other side of the coin, I think Philadelphia, the city, has a brand that it expects out of all its athletes. Sort of the Chase Utley, Brian Dawkins grittiness of the city. And so thinking about how the team fits into that narrative, something that we don't deal much with as R&D, but I know it's definitely a consideration for the GM and for the rest of the organization.
Right. And for sure. I mean, I think on one hand, what's nice about Philadelphia is that it's it's a passionate fan base, and they're going to typically show up, and I don't think it's necessarily maybe as fair weather as in some other cities, but there are always going to be certain things that the fan base appreciates a bit more, and they want to see. The Eagles get excited about gritty defensive play. I forget who the player was years ago who ran into a wall. The center, Aaron Rowe. Yeah, and that was like, despite all the great things that happened around that team that era, it was like one of the most memorable things. So, Pete, on the esports realm, maybe talk about the role of brand, maybe from the standpoint of your organization or with these gamers.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, it's pretty interesting. We're obviously in the process of building our brand right now, as a semi-startup, I guess you could say. And I will say that to Alvin's point with what Coach Wright has built here, I guess the word that kind of comes along with brand is culture. They're kind of joined at the hip. And what we're trying to do at Nerd Street is define and build our culture. But obviously we can't build it until we actually define what it is, right? So we're in the process of doing that right now. And I have to tell you, it is not without its challenges, because we're running up against the stigma, I guess you could say, which is totally valid, from a lot of folks, that we're just a bunch of lazy kids that sit around and play video games all day. And a lot of people still don't understand it. I'd be lying to you if I said I fully 100% understood what we are all about. But I believe that that's because we're still growing, and we're not there yet. When you build a culture, I think a lot of what it comes down to is that it all begins and ends with the people that you put into place, right? So there's certain things that as professionals we can train people to do. And I'm not just talking about Nerd Street, I'm talking about when I was at Comcast too. We can give you the prerequisite skills and train you on a lot of different technical things and, how to follow this policy or whatnot. But there's certain things that you can't teach. And I think that comes obviously down to sports in any capacity when coaches say you can't teach speed. Well, you can't teach somebody to have a good attitude. Necessarily, sometimes you can't get away with teaching work ethic. You either have a good attitude, you have a work ethic, or you don't. And that's one of the things that we're trying to define right now at Nerd Street, is to what are our core attributes behind the people that we want to be part of our organization. I'll just give you a real quick example of the culture and the brand that is totally different here than when I had at Comcast. So being an HR guy, I've been involved with writing policy and employee handbooks and everything else pretty much my whole career, right? So at Comcast, obviously the policies are pretty much in place, written, it's a well-oiled machine. Most people at Comcast, professionals, reference the employee handbook when they want to find out, how many weeks of FMLA, they can take off, when their wife has a baby. Well, I just finished up compiling a handbook for Nerd Street, and I had to write out, after learning some of our employees, an entire section on personal hygiene. Make sure, make sure you shower every day, That is completely different from the area I grew up in Comcast. And it's completely different from, obviously, a lot of other companies out there. So we're trying to stress to our current group, which is a very small group of employees, that if we want to be taken seriously as an adult company, we have to start acting like adults. And I think the culture part of it goes hand in hand with that. And from the top down, again, we're kind of in the early stages here, but we can build that culture if we put the people in place that will kind of, pick up the folks behind them and say, hey, this is what we want to do going forward. This is how we're going to grow. So that's been kind of one of my biggest challenges, I guess you could say, to this point.
Interesting. Yes, we've kind of heard kind of a spectrum of how brand works within these organizations. So we're kind of getting close to on time, and there is some room for questions from the audience. So yes, right away.
Say, ask me how much you do with psychological profiling when you do analytics.
So we actually have a separate mental skills department, and I think we have 3 people there now, and they do analyses of some of our draftees. They work with our players on performance. So it's a factor, but it's not sort of our factor.
We get data on that in the pre-draft process to try and evaluate is this mental skill is it gonna translate at the pro level? Some of that we use in models that we'll build, but what we've gained the most traction is getting those reports on certain players, and then our coaching staff using them kind of as learning opportunities that you may score well in this category versus that category. All right, well, it's not a bad thing if you didn't score well in this category. It just shows that that's the skill that needs to be coached up necessarily, and trying to relate that to the on-field performance.
Anyone else have anything? Yes.
Yeah, so my question is more I guess like towards baseball. So you guys are obviously like in a very high tech field, very modern field. So how do you deal with people that are very like old fashioned, like especially in baseball, that are so stubborn, like, oh, I don't like his swing, I don't like how he hits the curve, but like you showed the analytics that, oh yes he can, like yes he can do this, like yes he's a valuable player. Like how do you combat them other than some dirty looks in the hallway?
I mean, I think that's why, to some extent, we place more of an emphasis on communication in the people we hire than their technical skills. Like, everyone definitely has a floor that they're very good technically, but we also want to make sure that everyone is very good at communicating, because everyone in our department gets a chance to talk with the coaches, talk with the players, talk with the staff, and if you can't have a constructive conversation with someone like that, you're not really doing your job very well. And so we tend to just sort of like dive into it. It's like, okay, well, why do you say that? And if we can talk about the details of what I'm seeing and the details of what you're seeing and see where they overlap and see where they don't overlap, hopefully we can both learn something and take something away, because it's never black and white on any piece of information where humans are involved. So obviously there's going to be, there's almost always some aspect that you bring to the table and some aspect that I bring to the table, and we can both learn from those things.
Yeah, I think it's the biggest mistake of an analyst to kind of walk into a room, with a mix of people within their organization and think that because you know a lot about quantitative field that you're going to be the smartest person in the room. I think that having the humility. John mentioned wanting to learn, because certainly I know even though I played soccer, I still try to respect the level of experience that that the coaches and other front office people had, and learned a lot from it. I think that's important, for the analyst to think like that. Other questions? Yes.
So you guys are all very interested in kind of building a brand and kind of bringing people into an organization, but how do you all kind of track your athletes that are currently there and determining kind of the end of their time there and continuing the brand forward from a perspective of moving on from those that are currently there?
I mean, I would say we try to do a very good job of people that are going to be with us for more than a year or two, that are integral parts of our organization, to handle that transition process the right way, where if they are going to be retiring, like someone like Roddy White, like we've tried to keep him involved in the community, and Harry Douglas is another one who's now, I think he's going to be a coaching intern for us this year, trying to make you a Falcon for life, if you will. Matt Bryant is one that we valued immensely, but he was making a lot of money and we had to make a decision to move on from him. But that's one where we do hope that throughout the process of whether he's going to play more years or not, that we can keep him involved in some way in the organization.
Okay, another question?
For John, so how close is your team with the players? Like, do you guys report directly to them, and do they actually like working with you in the field of analytics, or do you report to someone else to talk to the players?
So I would say I've talked to players, but I wouldn't say that I ever directly communicate analysis that we're giving. We work closely with all of our coaches, so the key part for us is they have limited time to deliver a message to players so that they can execute it on the field. They have a process of all the things that they're going to communicate that have nothing to do with analytics. So if we can give them reports or things that we can interact with the coaches on and say, this is kind of the end goal, that when you're talking to Julio, this is what you guys would be focusing on the report, and then just utilizing the relationship that Julio's wide receivers coach has with him already, and he can say, hey, I'm going to tell you, this is one player, check this stat sheet out and see what it says, and then, they already have that comfortness where it's not like I'm meeting with Julio and like, hey man, like check out my numbers. Like,
Question.
Yeah.
Can each of you guys share with us one person that you may have recommended through the analytics or through scouting or through just HR that really worked? And I'm really curious about the Phillies because find out whether or not those new, you brought on a lot of guys, right, this year? So can you share, each of you guys?
Someone else wants to go first.
Alvin, how about somebody?
Well, Kemba Walker, he's one guy, and I think I actually got fired because I suggested him so much, but he was a guy that, he was a small guard, and this was when I was at Toronto Raptors. He was a small guard from UConn, and he was a scorer. And when he came into a workout, you have your own individualized workouts, he came in before the draft, and he had a pretty good workout, but everyone was looking for him to be kind of like a passer, a distributor, a facilitator, but he was a scorer through college. Came to the workout, and he showed, you know, you could tell he was coached. Someone told him this is what he's going to have to show. So he showed that, but his appearance, right, he came in, had jeans on, shirt, whatever, and he didn't fit the mold, I don't think, where the scouts and the management was looking for, along with his game that they were, so to speak, that they were looking for. So there was another player, Brandon Knight, that came from Kentucky, who during his interview, he told the staff that his game took off when he started taking academics seriously. So one of the guys asked, like, so when did you start taking academics seriously? He said 2nd grade. So I looked and I was like, wow, I think this guy got a little trickery up his sleeve. Like, I don't know, it's 2nd grade. So you start thinking. So I pushed, long story short, I pushed for Kemba Walker. Kemba Walker's doing very well now. He's doing very well. But you look at his projection, you never know. Opportunity, team, all that type of stuff. But he was one guy that I pushed forward, and his career ended up being what it was, and Brandon Knight's career didn't pan out so well. But with that being said, pushed a lot of guys. I stood up for a lot of guys who plummeted, who didn't do anything. So I could have got fired for that too. But it's just like you just never know. But sometimes you get a feel, sometimes you get a good feel, and a lot of times, as Pete said, it's communicating. It's communicating your thoughts and communicating why you think these things, and maybe somebody else can oppose it or they can agree with it, whatever. But it's just a lot of times it's a hit or miss, especially from a scout point of view, from just looking.
I do have one example. It's hard to top that because we're talking about players that are much more recognizable than what I deal with in Major League Soccer. But there was one particular draft that I was very involved in, and one thing that's very tricky about Major League Soccer, it has a draft system like the other sports, but you're not going into that draft necessarily getting a franchise player. You're actually pretty lucky if the player can come in and maybe start for you next year. It's just the college game in soccer does not feed into the same way to the program the same way as other sports. However, it's a great opportunity from a cap management standpoint, because if you can identify a talented player through the draft and you can come in and be in your 18, it's going to free up more cap space, and this guy could be a contributor. So. That was my first time going through that draft process, where I was at kind of like in the war room and trying to like defend players that I spotted from a data standpoint, with coaches and other front office people who were mainly evaluating with the eyes. And I didn't have a great data set to work off of, but based on the limited data that I had, there was one player that was standing out as central defender. He was a great passer. He was winning a lot of balls. He had a lot of attributes you look for a center back. He happened to be 6'7", a little bit slow, and so in the conversations, even though I kind of pointed out this player's really standing out, and there's some evidence to suggest that he's got potential. It was just very traditional in that people were writing him off because of the way he looked. They're calling him a giraffe, and he ended up having and still is playing. He was in the Defender of the Year conversation just like in his second season. But the one thing I didn't want to do was try to like raise that point to anyone. You know, I just kind of let that slide, but I made a sort of a mental or just a personal note on that. Sometime, and what I've realized is that you know, there are going to be, I think, players that do slip through the cracks because they get victimized by some of the biases that have come in. So you have those examples, and yet you have maybe the cases where, you know, if we put too much weight in the data, and, you know, maybe this guy, he's got these tremendous goal-scoring stats, but, you know, there was something about the level in which he was playing and maybe the support he had around him. Like, he was getting goals because he had great distributors around him, and that won't necessarily translate. So, you know, you gotta have humility and know when the data may fall short. So I'm trying to find that balance. I think we might be about at it with time. So I hope you enjoyed that panel, and we've got another one coming, and I guess we'll be around afterwards too.
Sure.
Great, thank you.
My name's John Horan. I publish a newsletter called Sporting Goods Intelligence, so we always like to joke that that's an oxymoron. And there's some truth to that. We have a great panel here today. We have Doug Kelly, who is an old friend of mine. He and I have been in the sporting goods business for 40 years plus. And Doug is also a graduate of Villanova, who has run a few companies in sporting goods you might have heard of, like Russell and Spalding and Easton and Mizuno. So Doug's got quite a good background. We have Ryan Donovan here, who works for a guy who he actually grew up in Philadelphia, and as a teenager he started selling skis and swap meets. Enrolled in Villanova, was here for a couple of weeks, decided it was a complete waste of time, it was getting in the way of him making money. So he went back to the closeout business, and I'll fast forward to the part where he started Fanatics, is now worth probably $3 billion.
He lives in a giant mansion about 2 miles
Yeah,
away.
yeah. Michael Rubin's his name. So I wouldn't recommend that necessarily for all of you to you know, drop out after 2 weeks, but it worked for Michael pretty well. Courtney Carlson is the North American VP of Marketing for Under Armour, and I'm sure you all probably know some of the Under Armour story. Kevin Plank, you know, was special teams captain at Maryland, and he hated wet T-shirts, and so he went and said, let's do something that's not cotton, and then he came up with Protect This House, and he, you know, in a very, very short period of time, built a $5 billion brand. And then we have Chris Brennan from the NBA. And the NBA, I will tell you, if you talk to people in the sporting goods business, they will all tell you that the NBA is the most forward-thinking league of all of them. They have always been out in front, and they have always been just terrific marketers. And so we're going to just kind of let them tell some of their stories and some of their war stories here. And I was going to start with Doug, because I thought Doug had some great ideas, and you know, the sporting goods business, we used to be kind of a small business with some small companies, and we used to have to kind of rub two sticks together to make a little bit of a spark. And so Doug is going to maybe talk to us a little bit about how he got Mizuno off the ground, and then later some of his experiences he was actually one of the first people to do a stadium naming rights deal. So Doug?
Yeah, hi. As John mentioned, I graduated here in 1974, had a great 4 years at Villanova. Started my career with Converse. I was there from 74 to 76, and then I joined a small company on the West Coast called Curly Bates. And Curly Bates was approached by Mizuno, who at that time was doing about $1 billion in sales, a very popular brand in Japan, the rest of Asia, China, etc. And they did both retail as well as wholesale manufacturing. And in Japan, of course, baseball was a rising sport, and they wanted to introduce their brand into North America so they could also authenticate their brand also in the Japanese market. And do they still teach the 5 Ps in business school here? Okay, so here we are. You have a Japanese company trying to break into a very traditional sport, all-time, baseball in America. So the first P is, well, they had product, okay? So that wasn't going to be the issue. And because they were vertical and whatnot, we had pricing. So, we were going to be competitive in the marketplace. What they didn't have were people, so they hired our company, Curly Bates. So now they got the people. So then what did we have to do? We had to develop a plan and then find a way to promote the product. And in building a brand, you've got to create your brand awareness. You have to drive consumer awareness. So you've got to you have to make your brand relative so that the consumer is going to want to buy the product. So a bunch of us, my team, we went off, did a 2-day strategy meeting, watched a lot of baseball film, from a different perspective. So how are we going to do this? Well, we came up with a crazy idea. We bought a motorhome, and we gutted it, and we set it up so you could repair and refurbish baseball gloves. Then we asked Mizuno to send their technicians, baseball technicians that built the gloves, over. And then we hired this small PR firm called Wiener Associates in New York, because our plan was to take this mobile home to spring training, motorhome, and drive around, and we would go ahead and refurbish and repair any of the professional players' baseball gloves. At the same time, we would show them the Mizuno product. We'd get to know the players, and we'd show them the shoes, etc. It became kind of this phenomenon. If you ever watched the movie Airplane and you have the translation thing going, well, we had these Japanese technicians. You had myself and one of my best friends, Jim Darby. There's a book we'll give you at the end of the session. The reporter is asking, well, what makes your glove different? We have to go to Japanese. He translates it and goes back and forth. And we went from getting local PR to national PR to, I get a call from Brian Gumbel from the Today Show and said, hey, we're hearing about you've got this motorhome, traveling around down there and talking to these players. We'd like to have you up here for the first day of opening day of baseball. Can you make it? Yeah, okay. So we drive the motorhome up there. We get our PR agency to also then coordinate a press conference afterwards, and we introduce the brand to the American public. At the same time, we also announced the endorsements of some of the players that we went after, which was also part of our plan. Some of the players that we ended up with our relationships were with Goose Gossage, Dennis Eckersley, Quisenberry, Dave Righetti, Steve Howe. Any of you guys and ladies out there, why would we go after those players?
Can I answer? No.
No. Yeah, go ahead.
They're recognizable?
Well, no.
They're all pitchers.
They're all
No, but even more important, what were they? They were relief pitchers.
Wow.
Okay? Relief pitchers get into the game basically every day, every other day, where if you get a pitcher, you've got the rotation 4 to 5 days. This was part of our plan. Why also why pitchers?
TV time.
What is the TV camera and newspaper photo on before he goes to set the pitch? So we had all this brand identity, okay? So all of a sudden, this large company from Japan trying to get in, we were getting all this brand exposure. We also went after a couple other players, and we followed them in college. Ricky Henderson, and Vince Coleman. Now, any of you know why we would do that?
Still bases.
Base stealers. We had Ricky from the beginning. He broke Lou Brock's record. Why would you go after base stealers? Same thing. The camera focuses on them at first base. What are they focusing on? The shoes. Okay? And when they go to the slide, same thing. And then we went after a couple other crucial players. But our thing was we needed to create this brand awareness. We were so successful, Brian Gumbel had us on for the next 5 years for the kickoff of baseball. And we would come up with products that we never really intended to market, but would create talk and buzz. So we came up with a see-through web glove. We were never going to sell one, but the buyers at retail, they were reading about this and seeing this on the news. And so, for a company like us to try and get an audience at that time with either Sports Authority or Herman's or whatnot, they wouldn't have given us the time of day if we tried to knock on the door and say, hey, we want to sell some baseball gloves. But they were hearing so much about us, well, come in and let's take a look at this product line. And they'd all want to see whether it was a see-through glove or the ambidextrous glove, but we wouldn't show that at first. We'd show them the rest of the product line, get them hooked on the good quality, and then show that product at the end that we never really sold. Except we came up with the first nylon mesh back glove, Black Magic, which became a mainstay, for the brand. And so had a great run with Mizuno, worked with some great players, not just baseball, but football. I had Joe Montana, John Elway under contract, Will Clark. We were big in volleyball, et cetera. But the whole thing was having the plan. We followed the 5 Ps. And we thought out of the box. And that's how we introduced the brand that is here today, and it's been pretty successful. So,
quickly, just talk a little bit about the pro player, the naming thing.
Yeah, we were one of the first, maybe the third that got into the naming rights deal. At that time, I joined Fruit of the Loom. They've been on an acquisition binge, and they bought the Salem Sportswear, which had NBA license on T-shirts. They brought Pro Player, which had basically been a supplier to Starter, but was able to get license rights. They bought Artex out of Kansas City, which was an entertainment licensing, and then they had just done a deal with Wilson to take Wilson to the mass. And so they asked me to come in and run this newly formed division. So came in, and basically between Salem and Pro Player and the other, there was like 11 different brand names. And we came up with, I took my team, again, together. I took the best of the management of all of those companies. We got together and we came up with a strategy. We would take Pro Player into the upstairs channel, as we would call it, and this other brand, Fans Gear, into the mass. Now there we wouldn't have to do a lot of marketing because we were vertically integrated with our printing and T-shirt and fleece supply through Fruit of the Loom. So we're going to be competitive on price, and we had licenses. So we needed to create something different marketing-wise to get Pro Player known to the general public. I had an acquaintance, his name was Wayne Huizenga, I had an acquaintance that knew Wayne Huizenga. I asked for an introduction and flew down to Miami. Wayne had just bought the Miami Dolphins. He owned the Florida Marlins and had just done a deal with the NHL for the Florida Panthers. And our idea was to do a naming rights deal. Okay, so now I have, and we did it, and we got all 3 teams. So now we have Pro Player out visible to the American public 12 months a year, because we went from football to baseball. Also, that stadium, we had a guarantee of 2 Super Bowls, 2 BCS Bowls, and with the Florida Panthers, we also were in the World Series. They played against Cleveland, won the World Series at that stadium, and then with the Florida Panthers, we ended up in the Stanley Cup. And the company In 1996, we were doing $125 million. 2 years after that deal, we were doing $270 million and had become the number 2 and number 3 generator of license royalty with the leagues. And a funny story on that one, too. Licensing was pretty profitable, and it was a $25 million deal over 10 years, which right now that seems like little compared to some of the deals, but at that time it was a big deal. And I got a $3 million discount because I paid the whole thing up front. Largest check that I ever gave to somebody, it was $22 million. And, but I got the discount because of the interest savings that Wayne would have had. But what we did, though, was we also created great marketing relationships with our retailers. You could go to Foot Locker and win an opportunity to 2 tickets to go see Kansas City play Miami in Miami. Modell's would run contests where you could win tickets to go down and see the Jets play the Dolphins. You know, same thing with baseball. You know, so we really used it. And then the other thing we did was we created one of the first vehicles of this kind, at least in licensing, for if a retailer committed to writing $250,000 worth of merchandise orders with us, they came down to Florida. They flew on. They had to pay for their own airfare. We put them up at a hotel, but part of the deals that negotiated, I also had use of the cheerleaders for fashion shows and the players. So we would do fashion shows, premiere our line to the retailers at Pro Player Stadium in the locker room. Jimmy Johnson would be doing the emceeing, and it just we had the buyers in our grasp. And then they go to a game, they'd meet with the players, and it was so we. It's one thing to have your cost of entry in when you do a marketing plan. It's making sure that besides that cost of entry, that you also then have the funding in the plan to maximize that use, so you keep driving consumer awareness of your brand. And SI was one of our big keys, and print media at that time. Today, it's social media. And the same thing I'm talking about applies to how you get to the consumer today, even through social media.
Okay, great, thanks. Let's move on to Ryan. You know, Fanatics is, you know, started off actually kind of as a back-end kind of operation. You know, they had a lot of infrastructure to do licensed products, which is pretty complicated in and of itself, but for reasons I won't get into. But they started off pretty much, you know, doing the licensed business for the leagues, for various teams. You know, so there wasn't really kind of a Fanatics brand. And Ryan came into basically turn the company into a real brand now. So, and he had a lot of experience with NBC Sports and ESPN and knows the space really well. But he's going to maybe talk to us a little bit about how you kind of really create a brand from scratch.
Yeah, that's what I do by trade, really, is building brands from scratch. When I got to Fanatics 6 years ago, I was brought in to do exactly that. And at the time, there were really 2 companies coming together. There was Michael Rubin's GSI company, which was sort of the technical fulfillment back-end company that was based here in King of Prussia. And then there was what used to be called Football Fanatics, which was a brick-and-mortar store in 3 malls in Florida that were really established to sell what was a new NFL team in Jacksonville, the Jaguars, Florida State, Florida, and Georgia football. And the son of the owner of those 3 stores, a kid by the name of Brent Traeger, convinced his father to start selling gear online. And he was literally selling out of the storeroom, or out of the back room of one of those brick and mortar stores back in, I guess, 1996 or 7, maybe 98, when the internet first started getting going. And they grew that business. They started running business for colleges and teams. And back in 2011, Michael Rubin, who was here, who was running the GSI company, sold GSI to eBay and held on to the league businesses, NFLshop.com, NBAstore.com. He then bought Fanatics and brought the two together, and that was really the genesis of what you now know as Fanatics. And not just Fanatics.com, but the portfolio of sites we run, the brick and mortar retail that we run. For those who aren't aware, we run the NBA store on Fifth Avenue, we run the NHL store on Sixth Avenue, we run another few dozen in-venue fan shops at various teams and schools. I was brought in about 6 years ago to build a brand, and at the time, the company was really sales and transaction driven. It was a family of guys who were literally trying to increase sales online. And when I talked about brand, the first question that came up in senior leadership meetings was, what's our TV commercial going to look like? Which couldn't be the furthest from how to build a brand. I mean, that's the result of building a brand, that you get yourself to the point where you can do TV advertising and tell people what you stand for, but it's not the way to really build a brand. I'm sure we'll get into that. I spent the first 18 months kind of banging my head against the wall, trying to influence culture, trying to influence how we think about a brand, trying to understand what our consumers believe Fanatics is and what we stand for. And didn't really get a whole lot of momentum until Doug Mack, our CEO, and Chris Orton, my boss and our CMO, started 4 years ago. And we literally started the marketing process from scratch. And it's a luxury to be at any business or any brand to get to start from scratch. Typically when you take a job, you go into a marketing role. The brand is probably known for something, and you kind of pick up where others have left off. We did qualitative and quantitative consumer research. We hired a company to help reposition what Fanatics is and what it stands for. We went through a complete site redesign, logo redesign, and just right around 2016 got ourselves to a point where we could advertise. We launched a brand campaign in the ESPYs back in 2016. And then this thing called the Anthem Gate started. The NFL business and ratings began to drop and plummet. We found ourselves in a situation where we weren't really able to justify a big spend to build brand awareness. And for the last 18 months or so, we've been applying analytics and metrics and all of the great digital learnings that the team in San Mateo has to traditional media. And that's what we're doing right now. We're actually, it's a really, really interesting time. We're doing this with Chris at the NBA and with our other league partners. We're actually taking, traditional digital metrics and applying them to a world in which, Nielsen ratings have been #1. And we've gotten ourselves to a point where our advertising campaigns are paying for themselves. And we know exactly how much traffic we drive to Fanatics.com or NBAstore.com or NFLshop.com every time we run a TV ad. So it's been super exciting. Brand has kind of morphed from building awareness and building brand preference to using traditional media to drive sales, and brand has become secondary to that, but it's been a fun ride.
Great, thanks. Okay, Courtney's going to talk to us about something that's been huge in the sporting goods business, the direct-to-consumer business, and how brands, you go around and you look at the Nikes and Lululemons and everybody else. I mean, they all value that direct relationship with the consumer more than they ever did. This is something that when Doug and I started, you sold something to a consumer if you were branded your peril, because you would be disemboweled by every retailer out there if you did that. But things have really changed, and so I'd like and Under Armour has certainly been one of the leaders in this trend. So I'd like Courtney just to talk a little bit about that relationship that they're building.
Well, and I think it does come from the brand, and when we've taken a look and we talked a little bit about the Under Armour story and how we started, and starting in 1996 with very clear insight into a problem we were trying to solve for an athlete, and how do you then go direct in order to communicate that brand. I'd say it's really the impetus of how the brand began. I mean, Kevin was going directly to teams, directly selling all the products. You know, and as the brand continued to grow, I think the things that we've recognized about the brand over time is it's always been a brand that's leaned in and leaned forward. And I think has just the amount of determination that we think there's a better way, right? I mean, the original t-shirt was designed as there must be a better way, there must be a better solution. And, you know, as I'd say, the trajectory, you know, sort of back to a DTC business. And when I say back to, I'll give you maybe a little bit of the landscape of where the brand sits today. You know, global brand, we actually have retail, and we are in 51 countries, which is sort of amazing. When you sort of look at that trajectory, and that's really happened over, you know, the last, you know, 7 to 10 years, that explosion. And it's been, you know, at a place of working to really get big fast, and how do we really reach all the consumers that we can. Within the North American market, which is where I lead marketing, we have 1,400 distribution points, give or take a few hundred doors, where we're in wholesale. And then we have what are 15 sort of brand houses, so our full price retail expression. We have another 160 or so of our factory house. So, but when you look at our business, it's almost equal between our wholesale relationships and for our DTC. And both are incredibly valuable. You know, I think when we think about the way to reach more athletes and that more opportunity, that's where we've leveraged that wholesale model in order for us to think about a multi-branded environment, think about, you know, how consumers are really completing their purchases. But what we've appreciated about a DTC or a direct-to-consumer model, whether that be physical or that be online, it's that ability to really extend the brand message. So I think we're incredibly focused on our consumers. So to the end of doing research, qual and quant, we're just coming out of about a year and a half of where we were studying the brand. You know, we began with really clear insights. We began with a really clear positioning because it was our founders' positioning. And those insights were very applicable and very valid. And as the company continues to grow into more and more product categories, more and more countries, we have to, you know, go back and study the fundamentals. You know, who's the consumer? Who are we reaching? What is the brand perceived as? We did a ton of brand positioning work. So what do we want the brand to be perceived as? How does that position ourselves in the space that we can carve out a space that's ours to own so that we can have the growth? And again, coming back to the direct-to-consumer space, we can really own that conversation the whole way through. So reaching your consumer, we see both as, you know, what's the media and the marketing and the content that is going to embody the brand, and getting to a place of where the physicality of a store, the site experience, when you control the whole site as your brand, you know, I see as another marketing extension. And, you know, physical retail, you know, we have 15 full price stores. We think we have the aptitude and the ability to have a lot more, where you don't hear a lot of retailers expanding store footprint, but we actually can see that as a way to have really a human-to-human interaction. And if you've had the opportunity to be in any of our brand house stores, I mean, the music, the smell, the way that teammates are dressed, how we cultivate, you know, every single selling zone is really an expression of the brand. And in fact, even the first full price store that we opened in Annapolis, Maryland, you know, it's like it's a tunnel, almost as you're walking onto the football field. You know, the store's been since redesigned a little bit, but when it was created, it was about creating that feeling of when you come to sport, and really the physical embodiment of the brand. So for us, it's a really keen touch point with our consumer. The other benefit, you know, from an analytical perspective, is we now get, you know, first-party consumer data. So we can understand how our consumer is shopping, what are their, not only what do they say through qualitative research, but actually what do they do, and that helps us build better content, better personalized experiences, so that as we engage with them, it feels less like advertising, but more like marketing, and marketing's much more about relationship.
Great, thanks.
They have a
Okay,
defective chair here.
you do.
Well, we'll ju-
Go ahead, I'm going to let Chris, then we'll have some Q&A hopefully, and
yeah. So by the way, I think just so you guys know, I'm sitting next to, and you guys are all witnessing a legend here in the sporting goods business. I've been around for 30 years, and I met Doug. Well, I met him. He didn't remember me because I was just as your age. I was pretty much a couple years out of college. Doug came in for Pro Player and Salem, and it was just an amazing business model. And those stories that you heard are really quite just exciting and just unique because he was the first. He was a pioneer. I then met him again, once again, not in the same, he was heading up Spalding when I was working for the NBA. We didn't really have a lot of interaction, but I've always known this man, and he is truly a legend in the industry. I started out, by the way, just to give you a little idea, I started out as
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah. I started out right out of college, and I was selling dolls for about a year, and that career path led me to Foot Locker. And that is really where I met Doug, and when I was at Foot Locker, spent 10 years there as a buyer, as a merchant, as a guy who marked down bad stuff, and then parlayed that job at Foot Locker into the NBA. And I've been with the NBA for 21 years now, and I have short-term memory loss because each year I have to reinvent myself. Because if you are not reinventing yourself, you will get left behind. So even though I've been there for 21 years, I've really looked at each year as unique and different. And I am part of the Global Partnerships Group. And what I wanted to share a little bit with you guys is that, we're talking about the strength of the NBA. We're talking about this, I can't go back to 1946 and take any credit for what's been happening, but I can tell you that, our current partnerships mean a lot and resonate with fans, and they really kind of create more fans. You guys probably know Nike, right? Nike, for those of you who are in the loop on court uniforms and what's going on, Nike has reinvented the uniforms over the past 2 years. They've introduced a line called the City Edition, and I see some nodding heads. If you know about what happened with Miami with the Vice program, if you know what happened with the Brooklyn Nets and Biggie Smalls, if you know what happened with Minnesota and Prince, like they just started doing all new storytelling and just reinvigorated an entire category. We also work with Pepsi as a partner, and some of you guys may know Mountain Dew is like their #1 partner with the NBA, and Ruffles too. So we're incorporating a lot of different our businesses with our partner Pepsi, and then Fanatics down what Ryan was talking about, very unique and different, but they are bringing the merchandise to the fans, whether it be foam fingers, whether it be basketballs, whether it be jerseys, or probably our #1 SKU. Can anyone want to guess what the #1 NBA SKU is or item? Nobody wants to take a stab.
Have a little
It's,
Armour?
you play it. It's the 2K game. So 2K19, #1 item in all of the NBA product portfolio. That product has now spawned I know we have Pete back there. We spawned an e-sport league, the first professional NBA 2K league. Does everybody know about that? Some nodding heads. We play out of Long Island City. That's the studio, and each of those teams, we have 21 teams that are now going to have NBA e-sport teams. So anyway, in a bit of a nutshell, our partnerships, our retail partnerships.
Didn't you draft a woman the other day?
Yes, we did.
One of the first, right?
And Chiquita, I forgot what team she's playing for.
Yeah, I do too, but I know it.
Maybe Sacramento, but yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
I think it was.
The first woman e-sport player. I don't know, Pete, if you have any women's.
Yeah, I know there's the Sixers affiliated team. I believe it's Dignitas.
Yes.
Dignitas, and it's extremely cool. Just the draft that you guys had was amazing.
Yeah.
For the actual league, I'm sure some of you guys are familiar with it, but the NBA 2K League is legit, and it's going to be around for a long, long time.
So anyway, just other ways that the NBA has kind of continued to be, strengthen their brand. Social media, right? I'm sure you guys know NBA is not saying anything bad about our counterpart leagues, but we are heads and tails above the other leagues. We have over 37 million people that are interacting with the brand on Facebook, and And then we were chatting before about this. Right below it, we got 21 million people interacting with the LA Lakers Facebook brand. So there are billions of impressions for the NBA, its teams, and its players on social media, and that is driving a lot of the strength of the brand. The other thing is data. I know everybody's been talking a little about data and analytics. I know a lot of you guys are studying data and analytics. It is the future. It is the future of making decisions. We had the previous board, panel was talking a lot about what's going on with it. But the NBA is just, not just getting on board, but over the past 3 years, we've hired almost 15, 20 people to do analytics for the NBA. So, and then the other thing, which I think John actually alluded to, is that the NBA is all about innovation. And I think the things we've just talked about, the 2K League and data and just creating these partnerships, they're always on the cutting edge. And they have a function. I'm not sure if any of you guys have ever had a chance to. We have a tech summit that happens right before All-Star every year. And this year, and Ryan, I don't know if you got wind of this, but the Adam Silver, who was a commissioner, projected what it would be like to attend a game in 2038. And one of the items that was presented was jerseys that can change with your phone, right? So you walk into a Sixers game and you might be wearing your digital version of Embiid. Well, let's say Embiid at that time will be retired, and at that point you say the announcer. In fact, I think the little video that Adam had produced, the announcer says it's Allen Iverson night tonight. So the little story that they told is that the mom took out her phone and she changed her jersey over to Allen Iverson from Joel Embiid. And what happens with all of that? I mean, you could be selling subscription to those names, right? So you're probably going to sell that jersey for $500, and then you're going to sell a subscription to certain names. You buy Allen Iverson for $1.99, and you buy LeBron for $4.99. It'll all be variable priced, But that's really where the league is always trying to stay a little ahead of the curve, and really through its partnerships, through its data, through all of the social media, it's really trying to keep a couple of steps ahead in the race.
Great. All right. So we've got a little time for some questions here. Here we go.
Yeah, my question is for Courtney, but it kind of touches on everyone. So we're seeing a lot in the NBA, a lot of new entrants and re-entrants, like Puma coming back into the fold with their brands and jersey partnerships. So how much does Under Armour actually look at that versus remaining competitive with just promoting Steph Curry and the athletes that they're representing?
Yeah. I'd say, we look at our sports marketing portfolio as a portfolio. And between leagues, between players, between, I'd say GOATs, between up-and-coming players, there's no science by any means, but I think where we start is to say, again, from that brand positioning, where's the consumer that we're headed for? What are the categories when we sort of look at our growth rates long-term that we want to be investing in? And then we really look at, I'd say, what do we have in those categories to offer? And I think that is from product. I think it's, our athletes. We will always tell our stories through our athletes so that we're telling stories to athletes. And then it's that mix of, when are we looking at leagues, players, collegiate, grassroots teams. So I think directly to your question, even within the basketball category, we absolutely see that as a growth category. And largely for, a lot of the things that even the league has been doing, that is a really compelling, place to be. We signed, Joel, we signed Mo Bamba. We have an up-and-comer with Dennis Smith Jr., and so there's those, again, thinking of that portfolio. And then we certainly have Steph. And I think, Steph's been such a cornerstone for the brand. And we were even talking earlier, when we signed him back in 2013, he's really developed so much as a player. We always look at players, too, that are really aligned with the brand. And so I think we see that our brand is very much about the collective, about the team, about the community of those players with that will. And I think both Joel and how he approaches the game as well as Steph, we see are very aligned with the brand values. So, again, art and science for sure, but we also, I think, are looking at always assessing that portfolio. While we're a big brand, we also don't have the biggest budget, so we're also very thoughtful and choiceful, but we know that, again, we're a brand for athletes. We want to speak to them, and we want to make sure that we're always developing for them, so that's certainly an incredible cornerstone of the brand.
Okay, sure.
Chris kind of touched upon this a little bit earlier, but how do you guys see social media playing into the space, and how do you think brands, and from your different perspectives, are you guys adjusting to the growing trend, and how are you handling it?
Social media has become a huge tool for us for selling, believe it or not. We actually inherited this gift from the folks that first started Fanatics, where they created a Facebook page for each one of the teams in all the major leagues, including colleges. So there is a Villanova Fanatics Facebook page, which allows us not only to know that you're a fan of Villanova, but allows us to serve up custom content to you. Prior to really investing in social, Google product listing ads. So when you type in, Villanova T-shirt, the thumbnails that populate the top of the Google page that say you can buy this T-shirt at Fanatics or Dick's Sporting Goods or Modell's or any of those other places. That was number 2 to search, just generic, ordinary search results. Social has surpassed PLA at this point in terms of driving revenue. Everything that we do is analytic driven. Everything that we do is really meant to have a return on investment. So we're now buying social to drive sales, which is pretty, we didn't expect that. It's pretty profound.
Yeah. I mean, we're seeing the same thing, I think. So, we're seeing our investment in social is up like 300% this year, and seeing absolutely those types of returns. I think we also work to balance it, from an organic social perspective, and then also from a paid. I think the attention that we're trying to play there is, our organic social teams are working a bit more to like a publishing model and thinking of, like content series and the ways, again, that manifests back to the brand. But I think thinking of that over time is, how do you program out, and when we look across our many social handles, I'd say the publishing model, paying attention to key moments in sport, key moments in culture, but also having an always-on level underneath, because I think that allows you to get more top-of-mind awareness, that allows you to drive consideration and ultimately purchase in the brand. I think the piece that we're trying to also work through is, what's that, much more organic, maybe published content, and then all the way down to like an ad and buy there. So I think it's really mapping that consumer journey the whole way through, so that you're serving content sort of at the right mind state, through the whole funnel to eventually then convert to purchase. So it certainly takes a lot of, I'd say, mapping, analytics, testing, but absolutely, I would say that's almost like our sole media channel.
I think it's a real plus for the brands right now, because you can stay continually engaged with your consumer, and that wasn't always the easiest thing to do when, in the past. And I think it's changed the dynamics of the industry. I think it can really help a brand, because you've got to keep that engagement with the consumer in order to keep them driving to your brand, your product, or your mission, or et cetera. So if you don't have a plan on social media today, you're going to get left behind.
It's funny, we're working with Fanatics right now on trying to help them when they're buying their social media, when they're buying their ads on Facebook. They want to do it under the NBA handle. So currently they only serve up ads under the NBA store handle, but they figured that if they could put it under the NBA handle, it would be a little bit more credible. But the problem, and this is late breaking news, right? We've been dealing internally is that, a couple of weeks ago, Anthony Davis, you guys probably know Anthony Davis, he requested to be traded. And in doing that, we were going to give access to Fanatics to drop an ad which is really AI. I think it's all algorithm, it's written, and it's all artificial intelligence. So if you had gone into NBA, if you were in NBA.com and you were looking up, or NBAstore.com, and you were looking up an Anthony Davis jersey, and then you went to your Facebook page, and you were one of those people being served that ad, you might be served an Anthony Davis jersey. And if it was under the NBA handle, which is considered the commissioner's voice, how would that look? How would that ultimately look, that we're talking about this is not exactly, the type of environment or what we want the player to be saying, but then we're promoting his jersey. So we're actually working with Fanatics right now to get over that hurdle, because there is so much upside, but there's a lot of politics that go behind it. So even though it's easy to understand how you can generate incremental dollars, there's a lot of different barriers that you have to get through.
Yeah. Just a little perspective on this too. I mean, if you look at brands like Under Armour, Nike, Adidas, all of them, they all spend about 10% of their marketing budget on 10% of their sales is their marketing budget. If you go back 10, 15 years, a lot of television, a lot of. Now you look at what they spend their money on. They spend their money on rights to leagues, major teams, major athletes, and social media. You almost never see a Nike ad on television anymore. And they used to be big Super Bowl advertisers.
Even
you
print.
almost never see a Nike
no
ad.
print.
No print anymore either.
Print, forget print. But yeah, no, I mean, it's the way they do, everybody does business, and partly because our customer base indexes to your age group. They're not really, I mean, people in the sporting goods, we kind of laughed when Trump was, thinking about the Colin Kaepernick ad, and people were saying they're boycotting. People are gonna boycott Nike, and Nike's stock went down and everything. We were kind of in hysterics because I mean, Nike knows that the kids that they're talking to, the stuff that Colin Kaepernick was standing up for, that's real to them.
It was important to them.
That's important to them. I mean, it was a big plus for Nike as far as people who actually buy sneakers.
By the way, I guarantee that wasn't a decision that was made on a whim in a boardroom. I guarantee there was analytics.
Oh, they knew exactly what was going to happen. Exactly.
And that's why you're seeing a shift from TV to digital, is because you can use analytics to make decisions. You're going to see, I think, a continual shift to those mediums where, unlike print, where you can actually use analytics to make decisions.
Yeah.
The other thing I would add too is I think there is a portion of digital that's from the voice of the brand, but I think the influencers, athletes, we spend a lot of time seeding product and doing that in a really orchestrated way. Or if we have a brand message, having sort of a call to action of all of our athletes to be using their social channels in order to tell the message in their voice. But absolutely see that as even at times a more credible way for the brand story to come through, is either through influencers or athletes of the brand. And as I was saying earlier, I mean, we are a brand for athletes, and so what's better than their own personal voice.
20 years ago when I started working for the NBA, I was head of retail, and we were doing billboards, print, some TV. But the one thing we were doing at that time, which we continue to do today, was experiential. And I know Courtney talked about it in her stores. We're bringing players to stores. We're taking video, and we're taking pictures, and we're putting it on social, and it has such a broader impact when you can use experiential. And we're doing things in store to kind of make connections. So right now, from the NBA standpoint, we invest in social, digital / and experiential.
Yeah. Villanova, you're even doing it with the new Fin Center and whatnot. Yeah. It's an experience, seeing the history and everything else. And I think even how Villanova positions itself to new kids that are interested in coming to this school. But sporting goods, it's a great industry, and it isn't going away. You may have some products that are here today, gone tomorrow. The way you may watch a game may change, but the game is still going to be played, whether it's baseball, football, hockey. basketball, and you can get a great career, and it isn't all just analytics. You know, you've got finance, you got product development. It's not just the teams and the leagues. You've got, you know, Budweiser has sports marketing people. You know, Pepsi has sports marketing people, and so there's a lot of areas that you can go into, and I can tell you it's. I had 40 great years in it. It was a lot of fun. I always enjoy talking about the stories with the athletes and whatnot, but it's also a lot of hard work. Your hours are definitely different. It's not just your 9 to 5. You've got the evenings at the games or the weekends. You've got all-star games to go to. You got Super Bowls and whatnot, and which for those of us in the industry, that's actually work. You know, oh, gee, you go to a game. I was telling these guys earlier, I'd been to like 18 Super Bowls, and the one I enjoyed most was number 19, when I didn't have to actually work and I could sit and watch and enjoy the game. So, but it's a great industry. I'm glad that the school here has got some interest in it, and analytics. We were pretty impressed at our lunch conference on how many of you were, you know, involved in analytics.
Anybody here not studying analytics? There we go. One person. Two. Okay, we got two.
I want a few more marketing people in there too. But no, you can have a great career, and you've got a school that breathes sports too as well. And Jay Wright's done a great job with the program here.
So do we have time? Do you want me to cut it off, or?
Yeah, I mean, we have the networking that's still set up out there, so.
What do these guys want
Well,
to do? They want to ask
yeah,
more,
you guys want to ask more questions? You
Or-
want us to go outside, do some networking?
Is there beer with the networking?
Yeah, there we go.
So for each of you, if you were stuck in an elevator with a Villanova business student and they said, what is sports retail going to look like in 10 years? What would you say in that short elevator ride?
I would say you teed that question up to get an introduction. This is Lucas. He's a graduate student here at Villanova and works on our NFLshop.com team.
Hi, everybody.
You've been outed.
Yeah, you've been outed.
And now Ryan has to answer that question.
No, that's my answer.
But the sea change is going on with retail, and it's happening a lot more rapidly than I think the retailers expected it to be. I think online is going to become, it's important now, it's going to become even more important.
Three years ago, we had 20 million square feet of retail floor space disappear from the market when Sports Authority, Sports Chalet, we've had, and some of that was because of what's been going on in general in retail. Some of that's because we had a bunch of pinheaded private equity firms that bought these things and didn't put any money into them, and then they ended up imploding. People are nodding their head if they know, because they know that's pretty much a big part of it too. But
Restructuring business is a good business.
And thank the private equity people for that.
Lucas, I would answer it. I mean, with 5G around the corner, I think it's going to open up a lot of new opportunities for shopping. And I think augmented reality is going to be in play. I think virtual reality will be in play. I think you're still going to have brick and mortar. I think, you know, Courtney, myself, we know that people still want, from a social aspect, to go into a store. But I do think that you are going to have more technology-based shopping. And I think we're already starting to see some of it, but you know, quite frankly, because you're dealing with a poor infrastructure right now, and when everyone graduates to 5G, you're going to have a totally new experience.
Yeah, I would align with that too. I think, you know, I was at Target for 16 years ahead of this time too, so I do have some retail in my blood. And you know, just even watching Target transform over the past couple of years, and I think some locations are better than others. Certainly, come to Minnesota. The Target retail there is great, but what I would say is like that they made a choice and got like blasted by Wall Street for that they were going to remodel stores, that they were going to invest in experience, and they certainly have seen that pay out. Walmart, the same thing. Amazon is getting a couple chinks in their armor, I think, even now too. So I guess what I would align to is like, like the retail is dying, bad retail is, but that idea of experiential, thinking through like how does that increase your social experience, the advantage that you might get, the expertise that you might get, I think will continue to come and maintain. I also think, customization feels a bit like a buzzword like personalization does, but I actually think customization will come in a place that will really allow consumers to take over as creators and designers in a way that we haven't seen before as well.
I also think for the brands, it really opens up even more opportunities for international sales. That you're going to be able to be more actively engaged with consumers in other parts of the world that may have an interest in your product line, and it's going to make it easier for you to converse and transact. So, which I think is great for some of the brands.
Yeah, I know we didn't really touch on it, but I mean, the NBA obviously has a global influence. China is one of the markets that has just exploded over the last 10 years. And it wasn't just, dropping in stores. It actually had to be a kind of a slow build. But the other markets like the Philippines and Australia, I mean, these places are just, they can't get enough basketball. They can't get enough NBA. And I do think that, there is going to be an explosion through some of the technology to allow these fans, and we have partnerships with Fanatics globally, that they're going to be buying and consuming even more in the future. But one of watching. But one of Nike's goals is to have China, for example, do as much or more than the U.S. in the short term.
Oh, it will. It'll pass in 5 years. It'll be bigger than the U.S.
I think they were targeting for like 2023 that China's NBA business will be bigger than the U.S. So
tell them how many people you have working in China.
I was just telling John, 120 people now working in China, and
think about that.
And it's growing every year. And we've got over 150 stores that through our partnership that we have with a Korean company that we're opening up stores. We have flagships in Beijing, but it's all very strategic. When we went in originally, we put a bunch of stores in and they folded very quickly. And now we're kind of doing it much more slowly, more strategically, and it's working.
Well, your ex-commissioner had Yao Ming. I mean, he went after players, and he was very strategic in his approach on China.
Well, if you guys read, does anybody know what the BAL is? Basketball Africa League. So that is going to be starting next year. It's in combination with FIBA rather, and it will ultimately, what it's driving is more NBA fans in Africa. I had actually asked a question at the last one of our board meetings, and I said, how many? Because there's already like a 12-team league in Africa. And I said, how many people do they hold in the arenas? And it's like, it's a high school gym. It's like 1,200 people. And I said, well, what are the average tickets? And they're $3. And I'm like, we're not making money off a 1,200 arena at $3. It's more about creating demand in Africa for the NBA.
And I guarantee you the NFL doesn't have anything going in Africa.
Not that we know of.
They're still trying to do it.
I guarantee you that the NFL has not even thought about it.
Any other questions? Well, we thank you for your time.
All right, thank you. Yeah.